I am sorry to have to tell you this, but the property has been transferred. The house has been sold. What do you mean you sold my house? I honestly did not expect you to come back. I assumed you would not survive the deployment. You forged my signature. You sold my home while I was serving this country. You thought I was going to die. Homeowners Association President Evelyn Sterling had forged the signature of a deployed soldier on a fraudulent property transfer document. She completed the sale of his home at 42 Elmbridge Way. She did this while he was overseas serving his country and pocketed the proceeds without a single moment of hesitation. When he came back from deployment and found strangers living in his house, she told him right to his face that she had simply assumed he was not coming back. What she did not know was that the Service Members Civil Relief Act carries strict federal criminal penalties. These penalties are specifically designed for people who exploit military personnel during deployment. She also didn't know the military's Legal Assistance Office opened a federal investigation immediately. The combination of wire fraud, forgery, and federal SCRA violations was going to put her in front of a federal judge. And that judge was not going to be moved by anything she had to say about HOA authority. Marcus Hayes, 34, a staff sergeant in the United States Army with 11 years of active service, had lived at 42 Elmbridge Way in the Oak Ridge Estates subdivision of Norfolk, Virginia. He lived there for 3 years before his unit received deployment orders. Oak Ridge Estates sat in the city of Norfolk, a middle-class neighborhood of brick-front homes and well-kept lawns. It was a place with wide streets where military families and civilian residents had lived alongside each other for decades without incident. Marcus had bought his home after years of base housing. He spent his first 2 years renovating it room by room. He installed new floors, repainted the exterior, and built a back patio himself over to weekends the summer before his orders came through. It was the first property he had ever owned, and he left it in much better condition than he had found it. Before deploying, Marcus did everything a responsible homeowner should do. He notified the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board in writing of his deployment dates. He provided an emergency contact number for his sister, Chloe, who lived just 40 minutes away in Chesapeake. He arranged for a lawn service to maintain the property in his absence, and ensured his mortgage payments were set up on automatic transfer for the full duration of his tour. He did everything right. He left for deployment in March with his affairs in perfect order and his house fully locked and secured at 42 Elmbridge Way. Evelyn Sterling, 58, had been the HOA president for 10 consecutive years. She had been there long enough to develop a dangerous level of comfort with her own authority. It had long since stopped being grounded in anything the bylaws actually permitted. She had a documented history among residents of overstepping, selective enforcement, and treating the HOA office on Elmbridge Boulevard as her own personal administrative kingdom. She had never particularly liked Marcus. He was not the kind of man who attended social events or deferred to people simply because they held a meaningless title in the community. His deployment had presented her with something she had apparently decided was a lucrative opportunity, rather than a difficult circumstance requiring basic human decency. Within 2 months of Marcus's departure, Evelyn began making quiet inquiries about the property. Within 4 months, she produced transfer documents bearing a signature that was not his. Within 6 months, the Miller family had moved into his house in complete good faith. They had absolutely no idea that the man whose name was on the original deed was currently serving overseas. Marcus Hayes came home in October. He drove straight from the military base to Oak Ridge Estates and pulled up to a house with different curtains, a different car in the driveway, and a child's bicycle. The bicycle was sitting on the very porch he had built himself. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe that a soldier who leaves to serve his country should have a home to come back to, hit that like and subscribe button and join us here on HOA Unhinged. Marcus sat in his car outside 42 Elmbridge Way for a long time before he finally got out. He walked up to the front door, the exact door he had painted himself, and knocked. A woman answered. She was holding a toddler and had the expression of someone who had no idea why a man in military clothes was standing there. He introduced himself politely by his full name and address. She nervously told him that this was her home. She said she had all the legal paperwork to prove it. Marcus drove straight to the Oak Ridge Estates HOA office on Elmbridge Boulevard. He found Evelyn Sterling sitting right behind her desk. He told her his name, stated his address, and demanded she explain why another family was currently living inside of his house. Evelyn looked at him across the desk for a moment and then said something that stopped the room completely. She told him, without flinching, that she had simply assumed he was not coming back. She said it without lowering her voice and without any apparent awareness of how those heartless words were going to haunt her for the rest of her life. Marcus turned and left the HOA office. He called the Military Legal Assistance Office from the parking lot. He had his deployment orders, his property deed, his mortgage records, and 7 months of automatic payment confirmations. The JAG attorney who took his call told him to come in the very next morning and to bring absolutely everything he had. Marcus was standing there waiting when the office opened. The JAG attorney reviewed the transfer documents within 2 days and identified the forgery immediately. The signature on the transfer paperwork did not match Marcus's signature on his original deed. It also didn't match his mortgage documents or his military identification. A forensic document examiner confirmed the finding within the week. The signature had been completely fabricated. The notarization attached to it had also been fraudulently obtained. The transfer was not just illegal. It was a severe federal crime committed against an active member of the United States military. The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a federal law passed specifically to protect active duty personnel from exactly this kind of exploitation. It had been violated in the most direct way possible. The Act prohibits any action that affects a service member's property rights during deployment without their explicit written consent and full legal notification. Evelyn had notified him of nothing. She had simply forged his name, found a buyer, and collected money from a transaction that was entirely fraudulent from the very first document to the last. The federal investigation opened quickly. Investigators pulled the full transfer document trail and interviewed the Miller family. They confirmed that they had purchased in good faith through an apparently legitimate HOA-facilitated transaction. They began building a massive criminal case that had Evelyn Sterling's name printed on every single page of it. Evelyn continued showing up to the HOA office every morning like nothing had happened. The federal investigators just let her. Then they executed a search warrant on the Oak Ridge Estates HOA office on Elmbridge Boulevard on a Tuesday morning. 3 weeks after the investigation opened, they arrived at 8:15 a.m. with 2 agents from the FBI's Norfolk Field Office and a representative from the DOJ's Service Members Civil Relief Act Enforcement Division. Evelyn was already at her desk. They presented the warrant, secured her files, and removed 4 heavy boxes of documents from the office. This included the original transfer paperwork and the fake notarization records. They also took 18 months of HOA financial records that nobody had bothered to ask to see before that morning. What those financial records showed went way beyond Marcus's property. Investigators found evidence that Evelyn had used HOA funds as a personal bank account. She drew from community maintenance reserves to cover her own personal expenses over the years. She had rooted proceeds from the fraudulent sale of 42 Elmbridge Way through an HOA administrative account she controlled exclusively. The forgery had not just been opportunistic. It had been financially motivated and carefully structured to avoid detection by the other board members. They had never been given access to the full account records during her 10 years as president. The forensic document examiner's report was entered into the federal case file the same week. It confirmed that the signature was forged and the notary stamp was obtained using a false identity. The timeline of the transaction placed every step of it within the period of Marcus's active deployment. This made each element of the fraud a specific violation of the service member's civil relief. Act. This was all in addition to the underlying federal forgery and wire fraud charges. Evelyn's personal attorney called the JAG office the day after the search warrant was executed to discuss a resolution. The JAG attorney's response was just 2 sentences. He said the case was now in federal hands, and any communication should be directed to the United States Attorney's Office in Norfolk. Then, he hung up the phone. Marcus Hayes was informed of the search warrant results the same afternoon. He said very little. He had already said everything that needed saying to the JAG office. The United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia filed a federal indictment against Evelyn Sterling on 4 major counts: wire fraud and forgery of a legal document. She was also charged with financial exploitation of a service member under the SCRA and severe misappropriation of HOA funds. Each count carried its own heavy sentencing range. The combination of all 4 put her facing a potential prison sentence that no HOA president in the city of Norfolk had ever faced before. Her private defense attorney filed a motion to reduce the charges. The motion was immediately denied. The fraudulent sale of 42 Elmbridge Way was unwound by federal court order within 60 days of the indictment. The Miller family was fully protected. They had purchased in complete good faith and were treated throughout the process as victims of the fraud. They were fully compensated through a court-administered fund drawn from Evelyn's proceeds. They were relocated with full cooperation from the court and left Oak Ridge Estates without any financial loss. The board removed Evelyn from the presidency the same day the indictment was filed. They hired an independent forensic accounting firm to audit every financial record from her tenure. The audit found $340,000 in misappropriated community funds redirected through her accounts. Every board member who had signed off on annual financial reviews without examining the underlying records was issued a formal reprimand by the state HOA Regulatory Board. Evelyn Sterling entered a guilty plea 8 months after the indictment. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of closely supervised release. She was ordered to make full restitution on every single dollar the audit had identified. Her own home on Elmbridge Boulevard was sold in a court-awarded liquidation to satisfy the judgment. Marcus Hayes moved back into 42 Elmbridge Way on a peaceful Friday afternoon. He unpacked his bags, walked out onto the porch he had built himself, and sat down to relax. He enjoyed the quiet of a neighborhood that finally had one less problem in it. If this story reminded you that the people who serve this country deserve to come home to everything they left behind, share this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you know a veteran or active duty service member who has been taken advantage of while serving, drop their story in the comments, because those stories matter more than most. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next episode right here on HOA Unhinged.